What happens when a simple call for help morphs into an all-out neighborhood rebellion against unwelcome squatters? Join me as I reclaim my sanctuary and maybe discover my own strength in the process. As I stood there, frozen at the threshold of what was once my personal oasis, a wave of disbelief washed over me. How could this be happening? I had watched enough crime shows to know that a home invasion had a specific script. The frantic call, the cops in shiny badges swooping in, tackling the villain of the piece. But instead, I was left with an image of a sweaty police officer scratching his head like I'd just accused him of stealing candy from a baby. Sorry, ma'am, but since they're not breaking anything, it's a civil matter. Civil? Was I living in a civilized society where people casually invaded your living space like it was Black Friday and all items were free? Sweat dripped down my back, but it was nothing compared to the seething fury bubbling beneath my surface, ready to erupt. Now, make no mistake, this was no ordinary band of squatters. They were a gang, albeit not a very organized one, led by none other than Miguel Ramirez, my new unintended neighbor. The man had the audacity to swagger around in that worn-out flannel of his, chest puffed like a peacock, claiming he was doing me a kindness by keeping his family dry. Dry? As if the smelly socks strewn across my living room and half-eaten pizza crusts could somehow be classified as a charity event. Miguel's charming smile could fool anyone, but don't let it deceive you. That grin masked a determination simmering beneath it, one that made him believe he could rewrite the rules of home ownership. Offended by this bizarre alternative reality, I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood, while mentally crafting my manifesto titled, "How to Get Your House Back from Thieving Loafers." Just when I'd begun to contemplate opening a Help Sarah Kick Out the Squatters GoFundMe, my vibrant neighbor Jenny Lou strutted in. With her hair resembling an explosion of color and combat boots that could kick down walls, Jenny was my self-appointed chaos coordinator. "You need to battle these intruders," she declared, her trademark enthusiasm a spark plug in my sagging resolve. Armed with a couple of mismatched mugs of Preventing a Midlife Crisis coffee, we plotted our counterattack. "We need to get some footage of them in your house. If they see they're being watched, they'll skedaddle like cockroaches when you turn on the lights," Jenny said, her eyes gleaming like a kid with a box of fireworks. I knew she was onto something. So we devised the most outrageous plan involving my smartphone, catnip-filled toys, and an elaborate ruse straight out of a Hollywood heist flick. That night, Jenny and I crept around my house like gymnasts on stealth mode, armed with the latest in technology, a cell phone camera that I had somehow managed to keep unbroken for the past 5 years. I dimmed the lights to create an eerie atmosphere. If there's one thing squatters loved more than invading uninvited, it was being filmed mid-invasion. We crouched behind my overstuffed couch and watched as Miguel and cohorts shuffled through my possessions. "Holy moly, are they inspecting my collection of cat figurines?" I whispered indignantly, horrified that my fine taste in fluffy collectibles was being scrutinized by these intruders. For a fleeting moment, I imagined them sharing tips on stolen trinkets, giving them a reality show name like Squatters Gone Wild. When they finally caught sight of our camera and broke into a cacophony of startled curses, it felt as if we'd just detonated a bomb of pure chaotic joy. "Back off, amigo. This is private property," I called out, flinging the door wide open, feeling as powerful as Hercules, ready to slay this modern-day Hydra. The look on Miguel's face was priceless, a blend of shock, faux indignation, and perhaps a smidge of humiliation that was almost delicious. "You think that filming us will change anything?" he spat, attempting to reassert himself as the boss of my unoccupied kingdom. "Sir, you have never been more mistaken." It was time to take the show up a notch. Fueled by an adrenaline high that striped my nerves and emboldened my spirit, I declared war not just for my home, but for all homeowners and unwitting victims of this ridiculous encroachment. With each flick of the camera, I could almost see the shriveled power of entitlement plummeting into a pit of swift karma. "You think you can take what's mine? This isn't just about property. It's my sanctuary," I roared, my voice echoing against the walls that had, until now, only known whispers of security and belonging. Meanwhile, Jenny, giggling at the absurdity of our impromptu standoff, was live-streaming the whole ridiculous spectacle to our mutual acquaintances. my indignation mixed with a budding sense of hilarity. What kind of plot twist was this? But of all the moments to come next, nothing could have prepared me for the phone call that changed everything. The echo of my ranting had landed on the ears of the neighborhood watch. To my astonishment, they sprang into action. A gaggle of concerned citizens, which included Mr. Hargrove from 2 doors down, a retired detective whose entire retirement hobby was subverting squatter situations, apparently, kicked into gear. Within minutes, we were a swarm of determined neighbors, marching with purpose as if we were invading an enemy fortress. What started as a simple invasion swiftly morphed into a legion of defenders, ready to combat entitlement with sheer force of community spirit. Could I really be about to reclaim not just my house, but my dignity as well? What if we finally put an end to this wild misadventure and sent Miguel and his gaggle of squatters packing once and for all? The tide had turned, and with it, my determination blazed brighter than ever. The gathering of the neighborhood watch was nothing short of a scene from a badly scripted action movie. We were a ragtag ensemble of retirees, single parents, and that one neighbor who always seems to be involved in everything but is rarely seen without their lawnmower. As they approached my house, I half expected dramatic music to start playing, accompanied by the slow-motion zoom-in on Mr. Hargrove's proudly displayed badge on his blazer. Not that it was an official badge, more of a rusty token from his days as a detective or simply a fashion statement, but still, he took center stage, rallying the troops with wild enthusiasm, gesticulating as if he were about to deliver the Gettysburg Address. "We will not let this band of miscreants tarnish our neighborhood," he shouted, and I swear, I felt the ground tremble beneath our unified upset. It's time to reclaim Sarah's sanctuary. Fueled by equal parts coffee and outrage, the assembled vigilantes readied their makeshift weaponry, garden hose, pitchforks, and several very pointed remarks that would cut through the air sharper than any blade. While I watched Michael and his crew scramble in my living room, completely oblivious to our approaching army, I couldn't help but grin. The look on their faces when they realized they were outnumbered would be priceless. My spine straightened with newfound fortitude. I marched to the forefront, fist clenched, feeling like a cross between Joan of Arc and a sleep-deprived superhero. With my heart pounding, I guided my passionate band of misfits, rehearsed my battle cries, or rather, battle commands. Let's not let them feel welcome, folks. And for goodness sake, keep the lawn equipment handy. As we reached my doorstep, I discovered Miguel lounging on my couch, the smug fip of this chaotic invasion, as if he owned the place. The audacity. It was almost admirable. Like an infamous villain in a cheesy action flick, he was too confident for his own good. "What's all this about?" he scoffed, attempting to stifle his chuckles. "You invite the whole neighborhood to cry with you?" I nearly spat my almond milk latte in disbelief. Oh, Miguel, darling, this was going to be more than a mere cry party. This was our neighborhood's Get the Squatters Out jamboree, and you were the guest of dishonor. Jenny, however, took it a step further. The woman was on fire. "Surprise," she said, her hands on her hips, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of impending victory. "We're here to reclaim what's rightfully yours." The other neighbors erupted into a chorus of agreement. I half expected them to break out into song and dance like it was a Broadway musical, but thankfully they preserved some dignity. Instead, they brandished lawn gnomes and garden tools like warrior artifacts. My heart danced at the power of community. Together, we were like a disheveled army prepared to rise against the wrongs festering in my once cherished home. The sheer absurdity of the moment demanded documentation, and Jenny swiftly pulled out her phone, streaming our glorious uprising to the world. "Just another day in Sarah's life, folks. You won't want to miss the showdown," she proclaimed, grinning like the Cheshire Cat. Across my living room, Miguel experienced a horrendous realization. His house party was rapidly transforming into a reality TV episode that could easily lead to their eviction. His confident demeanor faltered as my ever-growing crowd stepped closer, mere feet apart, and it was all I could do to stand there, radiating a sense of impending poetic justice. "You've overstayed your welcome, and frankly, you should consider a more appropriate venue for your community improvement meetings." The tension in the room surged like a tidal wave about to break, and I prepared myself for what I hoped would be the glorious denouement of this ridiculous saga. Miguel's cohorts, caught off guard and suddenly questioning their life choices, shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. The laughter of my neighbors felt like an electric current, charging the room with newfound courage. "What are you going to do, call the cops again?" Miguel barked, but his bravado was fraying at the edges. I answered him with a wide, victorious smile. "Honey, we're done with them. This is our turf now." The crowd erupted in cheers, and I felt the surge of empowerment like I'd never known. Was this the sweetest moment of reckoning, or merely the beginning of a truly bonkers showdown? Just as Miguel opened his mouth to respond, I interjected with a cutting remark that was both comedic and downright glorious in the face of our bizarre confrontation. "Listen, Miguel, this isn't a free Airbnb, so pack your nonsense, grab your stinky socks, and find yourself some scrappy real estate to squat in that doesn't involve ruining my life." My heart raced, and while the words hung like a weight in the air, I could sense the shift in dynamics. Everyone was on my side, and there was no way he could feasibly negotiate his way out of this mess. Were Miguel's days of strutting around my living space officially over? I was about to find out. In that charged atmosphere, the tension crackled like static electricity, and I could practically see the gears turning in Miguel's mind. Stalling for time, he attempted to play the peacekeeper. But we all knew it was an act as old as time itself. "Look, Sarah, I didn't want to make this a thing. All I wanted was a safe place for my family," he said, his voice attempting to weave its way through the chorus of indignation echoing from the assembled neighbors. As if this was just a casual misunderstanding rather than the stark reality of him invading my home with all the finesse of a bull in a china shop. I rolled my eyes, my heart thumping with righteous indignation. "Miguel, this isn't a charity, and last I checked, I didn't sign up for a reality show about nice guys finishing last." My disdain danced in the air, as sharp and unforgiving as the blades of grass beneath our feet. Jenny, my fierce guardian angel in combat boots, stepped forward, her voice booming as though the weight of our united front behind her propelled each word. "Look, Miguel, we're not the bad guys here. You can't just waltz into someone's home like you own it, pretending this is some kind of squatter party." Then she turned, waving her hand like a magician conjuring fairness from a sleight of hand trick. The neighbors erupted with fierce applause and shouts of agreement, marching right alongside her. I couldn't help but appreciate her flair for the dramatics. I felt like we were the protagonists in our very own movie. David versus Goliath had taken a turn for the ridiculous, and we were ready with our slingshots locked and loaded. So do the right thing, pack up, turn tail, and let Sarah reclaim her sanctuary before someone here gets real creative with that gardening hose, she warned, cheeky defiance lighting the spark in her striking blue hair. The absurdity of it all was almost too rich, yet it fueled my action-driven fury further. I focused on Miguel's expression, seeing the shift from bravado to hesitation as he took in the toothy grins of my unlikely brigade, each one eagerly anticipating the next breathtaking twist in our showdown. His confidence was melting away, possibly wondering how he'd found himself facing an infusion of determination fueled by ordinary homeowners, armed with misguided intentions and too much caffeine. A flash of insecurity crossed his rugged features, and for the first time, I sensed he understood the tide had turned against him. "Come on, seriously?" he stammered, taking a step towards the door in a half-hearted attempt at retreat, as if he might just waltz back into my living room like a lost puppy. "This is ridiculous." The timbre of his voice, typically assertive, trembled like a leaf caught in a gust of wind. With a smirk, I took advantage of his faltering wit, my inner warrior bubbling up. "Ridiculous? Oh, Miguel, you have no idea. You brought this upon yourself. Next time, perhaps think twice before making yourself comfortable in someone else's domain." The collective energy surged behind me like a roaring ocean wave, each neighbor nodding ardently, their chants morphing into a strong collective shout of solidarity. For once, it felt like this fight was led by everyone but me. I became the figurehead of a cause larger than myself. "What's next? Are you going to set up a camping site, complete with s'mores by the fireplace?" I teased, elevating the stakes and providing a comic reliever's punchline. The irony was hard to miss. It was surreal enough to feel velvety plush on the tongue of absurdity. yet sharp-edged enough to cut through the growing tension like a hot knife through butter. With each exchange, the room transformed from a battleground to something entirely different, an arena for change, where wrongs could be righted and communities awakened to their power. The crowd's laughter swelled like a carnival, but beneath the good-natured humor lay a fierce resolve that promised collective action. Just when I thought Miguel might erupt in anger or make another foolish last stand, I saw his shoulders sag as he caught the eye of one of my neighbors, Mr. Hargrove, whose expression had turned from fuming to flatly incredulous. Everybody eagerly leaned forward, anticipating what Miguel would do next, the pride and defiance of a community ready to reclaim its shred of normalcy palpable in the air. He backed away slightly, caught in a moment of hesitation that smelled vaguely of panic. At long last, it appeared the audacious squatter was beginning to grasp the magnitude of the mess he'd found himself wallowing in. With a resigned sigh, he threw up his arms in dramatic fashion, the defeated gesture adding a pinch of theatrical flair to the stalemate. All right, you people are relentless," he exclaimed, crudely gesturing toward my well-armed neighbors. My spirits soared at the mere thought of victory. Old good guy Miguel was going down, no, diving into a pit of irrational defeat. "Maybe you're right. I'll leave. For now," he conceded reluctantly, his bravado unraveling like an overcooked spaghetti noodle. As he began to gather his odds and ends to escape, the crowd erupted once again with cheers, laughter, and euphoric disbelief. We were still standing together, unified like a chain gang of do-gooders, armed with garden tools and thick-witted banter. "Remember, Miguel, just because you're packing up doesn't mean we're going to forget about this little adventure in questionable judgment." Jenny's voice rang triumphantly above the chaos, her brow arched challengingly. It was a glorious moment, a time where even the darkest shades of an absurd situation unveiled the brilliance of community spirit. Would this be our first step in reclaiming not just my home, but the very essence of neighborhood solidarity? The day was turning into a celebration of victory, laughter, and the exhilarating scent of triumph over adversity. As Miguel began to shuffle his belongings, a victory dance nearly erupted in the nest of neighbors surrounding us. The mood was electric, charged with a delicious blend of disbelief and raw euphoria. Jenny seized the moment like a seasoned performer taking the spotlight, invoking a synchronized wave that spread through the crowd. "There's not enough popcorn in the world for this dramatic live-action opera," she declared, her voice assertive enough to rally even the grumpiest of ducks in the pond. I glanced at the faces of my neighbors, who wore expressions ranging from gleeful astonishment to triumphant laughter. To think, just hours ago, my world had been feeling so utterly invaded and defeated that I could have hardly mustered a smile or even the energy to throw mascara on. Now, we stood together like a clan of avenging superheroes, ready to take back what was ours. But amidst the joyous cheers and euphoric banter ringing in the dusk-lit streets, a flicker of resolve began to ignite in my own soul. This wasn't simply about reclaiming my physical space. It was a call to arms against the careless disregard for accountability proliferating in the world. Getting Miguel out felt like extracting a splinter, yes, but the pain highlighted the deeper need for stronger walls, both physical and emotional. How many other homeowners lay awake at night, anxious about similar invasions of their sanctuaries? I lost myself in a whirlwind of thoughts while nodding along with the chorus of my neighbors. Perhaps this whole debacle could turn into a movement, or at least a riveting town hall meeting where I'd be the surprise guest speaker, meriting a standing ovation for my unsolicited slasher flick debut. But hold on, bright-eyed Sarah. While dreams of lodging a symbolic stake in the ground began to bubble up, I couldn't ignore the full reality of the circumstances. Miguel may have been retreating for now, but his piecemeal exit was more like a well-rehearsed Broadway finale than a definitive end. A thought slithered into my mind, dark and twisty like that desolate alley that echoed from my first confrontation with the squatters. What was stopping him, and others like him, from returning under the cover of night, like wolves stalking their prey? The laughs around me were joyous, but annoyance brewed in my gut. I couldn't sit idly by, feasting on euphoric energy and ignoring the lingering threat. Destiny wasn't going to negotiate. No, it was time to become proactive. Fueled by purpose, I turned from the jubilant crowd to confront the remnants of my assailants' impromptu camping site in my living room. Peering inside, I could still see remnants of their presence, the half-empty bottles of soda carelessly strewn about, along with the frayed edges of blankets transformed into makeshift bedding. What was this treachery, this audacious comfort in my sacred space? I glanced back at Jenny, her face alive with enthusiasm. While you guys tackle the after-party, how about I be the gallant knight, slaying the last remnants of this blatant invasion, I declared, pointing with exaggerated flair to the chaos that was now my living room. Consider this Operation Home Takeback, I continued, the name gaining traction as it flowed off my tongue with theatrical flair. Jenny's grin widened, and she clapped her hands together, already devising a plan that would make our high school organizational committees proud. I'll grab the paint and brushes. We could even give it a new look while we're at it. Nothing screams, "You're not welcome here," quite like a bold splash of color. Raucous laughter bounced back to us, undoubtedly fueled by the absurdity of the challenge ahead. And crayons? Don't forget those. Maybe we can host an arts and crafts session to express our angst. I shot back sarcastically, but deep down, the wheels of inspiration were turning. Perhaps humor was our best weapon. It could be the perfect veil for the seriousness of our mission. We could reclaim my home's identity as something that echoed love, laughter, and solidarity instead of despair, resentment, and unwanted visitors. It was time to paint the place out of this quagmire of chaos and infuse it with life once again. The next few hours blurred together into a colorful frenzy filled with snacks, strategies, and enough garbage bags to rival what you might find in an overstuffed, grimy alley. My neighbors poured their energy into the task and wielded brushes as if launching a vibrant coup d'etat against the insidious shadows of Miguel's brief, yet unwelcome, occupancy. The joviality was infectious. I engaged in idle banter with Mr. Hargrove, who regaled us with tales of his own youthful escapades and how he once dared a raccoon to a stare-down when it invaded his backyard. Each anecdote wielded a power that echoed deep within each of us, a reminder that we could rise above this nonsense. This was more than restoration. It was renewal. It was about reclaiming my sanctuary, my laughter, and even my sanity. As the night deepened, my living room transitioned from a war zone to a canvas of vibrant possibilities. Everywhere I looked, it was a tapestry of revived energy. A community working together to assert that we were not just passive observers. We were warriors, equipped with paintbrushes and a fierce sense of justice. The warmth of laughter enveloped us like a soft blanket, mending the frayed edges of a chaotic day. Okay, maybe I was getting a little overly sentimental, but it felt like my home was being reborn, a phoenix rising from the ashes of havoc. So, what's the call when Miguel inevitably slides back in? I quipped, igniting a cacophony of opinions and ideas that were as colorful as the paint splatters now adorning my walls. Would he take the hint and skulk away forever? Or would he inevitable default to the role of a nemesis, ready to invade once again? My heart swelled, my apprehensions undulating between serious concerns and hopeful imagery. This was just a small taste of what we could do together, if not for me, then for everyone struggling to stand their ground against unwelcome tenants. But the bittersweet truth rang loud like a bullhorn in my ears. As exhilarating as this moment was, I had an inkling our mercurial Miguel might not be done. Not yet. The night felt electric, anticipation crackling against the walls alongside the paint. Had I just kicked the hornet's nest and unwittingly summoned a swarm? I needed a strategy, something beyond mere bravado, to prepare for whatever might come knocking next. Would Angelo Miguel come back swinging for round two, or would the hilarious turn of events give him cause to reconsider? Only time would tell. The next morning dawned with the golden glow of hope, but just as the sun began to filter through my living room windows, I felt a tremor of trepidation ripple through me. Those vibrant splashes of paint that should have brought joy appeared like neon war flags, terrifying signals to any would-be assailants. Were they enough to deter Miguel and his ragtag band of entitled squatters? Surely he didn't think he could just set up camp in my sanctuary without consequences. As I sipped my coffee, the steam curling around me like a comfort blanket, I resolved that I had to channel this somewhat manic energy into formulating a plan. I wasn't about to let a former squatter, and the chaotic theater that had been my life, steal my serenity again. Clarity began to emerge from the fog of my chaotic thoughts. I needed to set boundaries fortified by law and reinforced by community support. The block party from the night before had cultivated a sense of urgency, but this time it wasn't about paint colors and laughter. It was about drawing a line in the sand. I clutched my notepad, doodling plans for a neighborhood watch brigade while crafting a performance that could rival even Broadway's most gripping shows. Operation Home Takeback had jumped from just being a vibe into something tangible, something that could cement my right to peace. And isn't that what everyone deserved? I would leverage my newfound decorum against those who presumed my kindness for weakness. It was time to be unyielding. As I planned, visions of my squad began to populate my mind, each neighbor with their unique quirks, standing shoulder to shoulder alongside me, ready to defend the sanctity of our homes. Jenny would undoubtedly bring her combat boots and boundless energy, probably promising to deliver the bat signal, should there be a necessity for a showdown. Mr. Hargrove, who I was convinced was part raccoon with his road-scarred bravado, could channel his youthful escapades into guerrilla tactics of rousing the neighbors at any sign of trouble. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a community-wide crusade against apathy, injustice, including all the paper-pushing police authority that had failed to act previously. As the cheerful sunsets of ideas washed over me, the sound of my front door creaking open jolted me back to reality. My heart raced. What if it was Miguel? What if he'd brought reinforcements to reclaim his territory? Breathing slowly, I approached the door, heart drumming like an angry hamster against its cage. But as I peeked out into the corridor, my pulse steadied. Lo and behold, it was not the familiar distressed visage of my invader, but rather the fascinated face of Mrs. Hastings, my elderly neighbor from 2 doors down. "I heard you've had quite the commotion around here, dear," she chirped cheerfully, her eyes sparkling with gossip-laden excitement. "I wanted to see if you needed any help." Mrs. Hastings was an unsung warrior in her own right, a grandmotherly figure who wielded her love for baked goods like a badge of honor. Just one whiff of her legendary oatmeal raisin cookies had been known to unite all neighbors during chilly evenings. With that thought dancing through my mind, I seized the opportunity. I rallied my nervous energy and motioned her in, wanting to blend her strength with my fortifying plans. "You wouldn't believe what has happened. I've retained my sanity and painted the living room fuchsia," I exclaimed dramatically, barely staying grounded in a whirl of excitement. While she blinked in disapproving silence, I poured my heart out, and soon enough, I had her fired up. The idea of taking our block back reverberated through open-air laughter, the promise of cookies enticing a coalition against the encroaching shadows of lost ownership. Within mere hours, the giant orb of community spirit rippled through my house, transforming my modest sanctuary into a booming command center. Flyers were born, bursting with zeal like a caffeine-fueled explosion, blaring our intent to assemble like bees swarming a blooming flower. Neighborhood watch meetings were planned, scheduled for Friday nights, an unconventional chance to gather forces and dig deeper into the excuses that had allowed squatters to sleep easy while rightful homeowners tossed and turned, burdened by uncertainty. "The more absurd their entitlement becomes," Jenny quipped, "the more we must wield our sense of valor to reclaim what is ours." Her humor, while cutting, resonated like a battle cry, fueling our resolve. As the days dragged on, I could feel Miguel's presence looming at the fringes, like the villain in a B-horror movie who pops up long after you think they're gone. The exhilarating raucousness of our preparations cushioned the anxiety brewing in my gut. Every time the sun set, I braced for the encroaching possibilities, either a harrowing confrontation or a desperate retreat. Even my dear neighbors felt the electric charge of anticipation weaving around our usual pleasantries, the upcoming neighborhood watch meeting becoming a landmark rallying point. But would I stand calm at the head of the table, ready to channel my fierceness into coherent ideas, or would I devolve into dramatic tangents fueled by frustration and sarcasm? The sore fact remained. Biscuits and battle speeches may not keep the real threats at bay, but it was time to find out if I could transform this chaos into something powerful. As I wrapped up my day, I noticed the slight shift in the air, like rumbling thunder on the horizon. The stage was set, my community ready to back me, all in unison. But what about Miguel? Would my efforts yield even a flicker of doubt in his mind? Was I merely bending the chaos of invasion into metaphorical pieces? My mind swirled with possibilities. No longer could squatter antics merely be eclipsed by laughter. Now, they demanded resolution and strength. Would I triumph against this unwelcome disruption, or would I prove to be just another overzealous dreamer lost in the fray? Either way, the showdown was coming. It was only a matter of time until I found out. The day of the neighborhood watch meeting dawned with a gravity that almost rivaled the prelude of a Shakespearean tragedy. There I stood in the middle of my living room, armed with cardboard, markers, and a half-eaten oatmeal raisin cookie held hostage in my palm, uncertain whether I was about to lead a cerebral campaign against Miguel's ignorance or embark on the most passionate impersonation of a community organizer. "You got this, Sarah," I muttered to my reflection in a nearby window, over which I had plastered posters filled with slogans ranging from "Protect our right to dream" to "No more squatters in my sanctuary." It was the battle of a lifetime, and when you had a cookie in hand, the odds couldn't possibly be any worse, right? As the clock ticked menacingly towards 8, the unusual buzz of anticipation thickened in the air, almost palpable enough to reach across my elegant little lawn chaos. Slowly, warm bodies began to filter in, each of my neighbors wearing puzzled and determined expressions. The odd gathering felt somewhat like a bizarre family reunion, where squabbling cousins were momentarily united by an external crisis. Jenny bounced in, rocking an epic new take-no-prisoners look, vintage camo and combat boots paired with an oversized Block Party Avengers tee that she had hand-painted herself. "Let's kick ass, Sarah," she hollered, fists raised like a jilted cheerleader as she surveyed our hastily assembled command center. What a wonderful eruption of chaos we had curated. I gathered everyone's attention, channeling the spirit of a mix between a general rallying their troops and an over-caffeinated TED talker. "All right, everyone," I exclaimed, my voice cracking with intentional enthusiasm. "Tonight, we are not just neighbors. We are the indomitable shield of justice against the incoming tide of entitlement. Miguel and his squatters may think they've claimed my kingdom, but we will not cower in the face of blatant absurdity." The room erupted in cheers that echoed off the walls of my hastily repurposed living room. Out here in this war of resilience, I felt the synergy of unyielding camaraderie beginning to build, and my spirit crackled with the electrifying promise of take back. However, that adrenaline surged as I glanced at Mr. Hargrove, who had now taken it upon himself to prepare an amateurish flip chart illustrating exactly how squatter rights clashed against homeowner rights, complete with stick figures. I couldn't help but snicker under my breath. "Is that supposed to be a slingshot?" I whispered to Jenny, as Hargrove blurted out illustrative scenarios that made every squatter look like they were either hired assassins or misguided scouts from a poorly executed camping trip. But what we lacked in seriousness, we made up for in fiery passion. And I knew somewhere beneath the surface, even if it was buried under poorly drawn diagrams, our ferocity to reclaim my home was a force to be reckoned with. Our planning spiraled into organized madness, full of hysterical laughter interspersed with moments of biting seriousness as we finalized Operation Home Takeback. The dark clouds of fear fluttered away like scattered leaves in a brisk wind. The former dread of Miguel's presence seemed to evaporate with every shout, every battle strategy sharp without missing a beat. An hour slipped away in a whirlwind, with Jenny organizing surveillance duties while others set themselves on quick gardening patrols. Yes, even the plants warranted our meticulous dedication now. But like clockwork, one question hijacked my determined thought process. What if Miguel was watching? Would he come for me? The concept sent a chill down my spine, stark reminders of that vandalized lawn creeping into my well-constructed plans. Outside, as the twilight deepened into an eye-catching indigo, the stars twinkled mischievously overhead, sending little messages that echoed my growing resolve. A few neighbors had agreed to be posted at critical corners of the block, armed with smartphones and an assortment of microwaved popcorn. They were prepared to document any further absurdity that dared unfold. No more tiptoeing around the issue. This felt like a fever dream. A community standing together was now more than a beautiful idea. It was a legitimate chess game against those who assumed us weak. I glanced at my makeshift crew, each individual fueled by our shared outrage, half believing this plot belonged in some social justice film while flicking an imaginary bird at squatter entitlement. But just as I started feeling like we'd conjured up our very own Avengers, I heard it. Soft footsteps scraping against gravel outside. My heart leaped into my throat, pounding like 1,000 drums in protest. Was that him? The unsettling sensation of dread coiled around me like a dark serpent. Had Miguel come to reclaim his post? I took a deep breath, slowly edged towards the window, and cautiously peered through the curtains. To my complete shock, there he was. Miguel, but he was not alone. The haunting shadows of 2 other squatters flanked him, and they appeared to be watching, almost lurking, as if gauging our defenses, planning their next move. The comedy of our earlier discussions suddenly shattered like glass, replaced by a bleak unease. I backed away from the window. What would Juan say? Would he think I was just another clueless homeowner fumbling through her own tapestries of fears? But if he took one step closer to invade vocal eccentricities into my humble abode, there would be no more Mr. Nice Sarah either. This was my sanctuary, damn it. I felt a wave of fury surging through me like a roaring fire. My plan, a flaming heart slipping through the cracks of reason and uncertainty, was ignited only by the potential for one jarring confrontation. Maybe it was time for Operation Stand and Fight to truly unravel, as I slowly pieced together everything I had prepared for that very moment. My fingers curled tightly around the notepad in my hand, and I knew with reckless abandon this would not end until I won back my home. The tension in my little fortress of home reached a breaking point as I tiptoed away from the window, another bead of sweat trickling down my spine. Miguel and his 2 stooges were a sight to behold, each wearing expressions that screamed trouble. My adrenaline surged, and I felt the heat of righteous fury fueling my rebellion. This was a standoff, plain and simple, and I had all the motivation I needed to defend my sacred space. Quick as lightning, I gathered the troops who had selflessly volunteered for my benighted crusade. A glance in the mirror reminded me to channel my inner warrior, and refusing to let my anxiety control this moment, I barked out orders. Jenny, grab your colorfully chaotic banner. We need to show them the full wrath of community spirit, I shouted, suddenly energized by the gravity of the situation. My neighbors hustled to full alertness, rallying around me with a tumult of whispered plans and hurried gestures. The room transformed into a war room, a chaotic genius brewing amid organized madness, equipped with flyers and bold proclamations. Who knew my living room could double as the headquarters for the resistance against entitled squatter intruders? I quipped, trying to light a fire of humor into the gravitas of the impending confrontation. I felt a strange kinship with my neighbors, each of them imbued with the kind of fervor that could scare off a horde of zombies, or in this case, squatters. Jenny erupted into laughter, flipping through her sketches of squatter versus homeowner, battle scenes with reckless abandon. If only we could illustrate what's about to happen tonight, Sarah. It'd be an epic pop culture crossover. The thought was both absurd and thrilling, especially when I pictured myself, a fearless homeowner, slaying the shadows of entitlement like a superhero, wielding a broomstick instead of a sword. But as we strategized, the air grew thick with apprehension. The reality of our situation settled into my bones like a bitter chill. I had heard too many horror stories of confrontations gone awry, and knew deep down that the stakes had surpassed the high drama usually reserved for reality TV. We needed an edge, a psychological warfare tactic to counteract the audacious squatters brazenly occupying my space. Inspiration struck like a thunderbolt. We'd gather our forces and march into the fray. My living room was defending itself, not with weapons or threats, but with the sheer force of community spirit wrapped in viral energy that would echo throughout social media. We'll create a scene they won't forget, I declared, clenching my fists like a mini activist ready to take on the world. My neighbors rallied behind me, armed with smartphones, homemade posters, and that magnificent heart, fired up and ready to defend the sanctity of my home. As the door creaked open, My pulse raced in time with the chilling wind that swept through the room. Like a scene from a gripping action movie, I stepped into the light, revealing our collective rebellion, a scrappy but fierce army against the nefarious squatters. Miguel stood at the helm of his encroaching chaos, looking more rugged and ill-intentioned than ever, while his two cohorts tried to catch up as they scanned our collective force in disbelief. "What a surprise," I called out sarcastically, plastering a grin across my face that neural pathways had forged from outrage and spirited comedy. "We're throwing a housewarming party, and you're all invited. Just a little demolition derivative on reclaiming what's ours. So sorry for the non-compliance. But it seems we've switched the locks." The standoff morphed into an absurd spectacle, a showdown littered with snarky banter and clever quips that could fuel a stand-up routine. Miguel's bravado faltered against the sheer force of my unyielding resolve, as I wielded the laughable absurdity of our circumstances to illustrate how utterly ridiculous this confrontation had become. His eyes darted, searching for a semblance of authority that had crumbled under the weight of camaraderie that filled my living room. "You think this is a game, don't you, Sarah?" he hissed through gritted teeth, voice laden with desperation. "You're just a scared little homeowner trying to play the hero." The sarcasm dripped like rain on a parched land, and it spurred something explosive within me. Utilitarian wit paired with the momentum of local support had morphed this scene into an electric showdown where the absurd collided with the heroic. Fueled by my prepared cause and a spontaneous eruption of neighborly love, I silenced his insults with cool composure. "If by hero you mean a homeowner determined to defend her sanctuary against squatters who think they can take what isn't theirs, then yes, I'd be a proud hero. What tangible solutions do your malicious plans offer, Miguel?" I shot back, relishing the vulnerability of his squirming facade stripped bare under community scrutiny. The tension thickened in the air, with even the plants seemingly leaning in, eager for every punchline of this insane melodrama. Not only was my living room restored, but so too was my life's work. Justice rippled into every crack of the floorboards, fueled by every ounce of righteous anger. My heart somersaulted with vigor as their bravado began to crumble in front of our united front. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to get in on the action, Miguel's minions slowly began to back away, doubt reflected in their jittery expressions. The tables were turning, and every jab I threw landed like a perfectly executed dramatic punch. Finally, with a tremor of panic in his voice, Miguel spat out a half-hearted, "Maybe we can resolve this." But it was far too late for negotiation when our combined righteous fury had formed an impenetrable wall in front of their entitlement. Cheers erupted from my neighbors, ringing throughout the room, casting our battlescape in light and laughter. The spectacle of our courageous fight was now a story capable of echoing through the annals of viral fame. My heart surged with laughter that echoed across my reclaimed space as I watched them finally retreat, vanishing ghosts of entitlement shattered beneath my newfound resolve. My home was truly my haven once again, and I savored this victory with every fiber of my being.